Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Gentlemen, how you doing today? Doing good? Not that I can hear you, but I hope you're doing good. If you're not doing well, then emotion is a fickle thing. I hope you're doing good soon. Let's get into it. Another History Matters video. Did the USSR have millionaires? Commies. It's a good question. Let's find out. Original video at the top of the description below, like always.
When you think of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, you probably don't think of millionaires. The Soviet Union was, after all, a communist country built upon the ideals of economic equality. That said, human beings like to do their own thing, and getting rich in a country that you're not supposed to is hardly unimaginable. So did it ever happen? Were there any millionaires in the USSR, and if so, how did the people there react? So there are some difficulties in answering this question, since there were limitations on how money in the Soviet Union worked. For example, quantities of cars, toilet paper and foods were strictly controlled, and so getting more of these was reliant on political connections, not cash.
The car part, I saw something about the cars in Soviet Russia because, you had capitalism in Western Germany, Western Europe, Western Berlin, and you had communism in the East. And in the West, obviously, I'm not, communism, capitalism, I think one's better than the other, but I don't think that either of them are free of giant flaws and flaws that need to be curtailed, curbed, if you want a semi-successful society. But the big problem that is kind of exemplified with what I'm about to say here with the cars is that in the West you have competing companies, creating better cars and things. Not everyone can afford them, but more quality materials. And in the USSR, they had one car. I could be wrong here, but like one car maker, because you can't have competing private businesses to make better products to appeal to consumers. And so they had this one car that just everyone had, and it wasn't the greatest car. And it's not like you could just get a different one and force them to change. So I think that's all right. A lot of problems. Was it like Churchill or someone said that I agree with? Like capitalism is the worst socioeconomic system except for all of the other ones. So they all have flaws, but just the car example I thought was pretty funny.
And also, it's not like you could be so rich that you could retire early, since for most, lengthy unemployment was against the law. That said, if you had the political connections and the right job, you could live a pretty comfortable life, comparable to millionaires in the West. For example, many high-ranking ministers who served under Stalin had very little concept of money, since as government ministers they could ask for something and simply be brought it with no money leaving their pockets. One funny anecdote which demonstrates this is from when Stalin and his ministers were going for a walk around Moscow, and doing so they saw an old lady struggling to cross the road. Stalin helped her to cross and then wanted to give her some money to help her out. One problem though, neither Stalin nor his ministers carried any money with them since they never used it, and the old lady got squat. Anyway, to answer the question as to whether or not there were any people who had the equivalent of $1 million openly in the USSR, the answer was yes, although it didn't happen until very late in its life. After Gorbachev had reformed the economy to allow some private enterprise, some people started to make a lot of money, particularly from importing luxury goods from the West, and one man started to make a lot of money, particularly from importing luxury goods from the West. And one man who did this was Artyom Tarasov, who in 1989 declared on television that he was the first person in the USSR to be worth millions of rubles. Which wasn't millions in terms of US dollars, but given that for most Soviet citizens their yearly wage was between 1,500 and 3,000 rubles, it was a lot. So how did the Soviet people react? Well, very well, and they all congratulated Tarasov on "just kidding, they were outraged." Protests sprang up in major cities, politicians denounced the acquisition of capital on kidding. So how did the Soviet people react? Well, very well, and they all congratulated Tarasov on "just kidding, they were outraged." Protests sprang up in major cities, politicians denounced the acquisition of capital on that scale.
I heard that there's a Soviet general or politician, maybe it was a president, prime minister, who liked CocaCola so much, but CocaCola was a symbol of, one of the most well-known symbols of, like a symbol of American capitalism to them. And so Coca-Cola actually had these clear bottles made with like the Soviet star on the top, and like it looked slightly different, and they changed the color somehow into clear so that they could still send them some. So it just shows you how both of their problems, but an obvious problem I'm going to say about communism, again, I know there are a bunch of flaws I'm not saying about capitalism, but is that you don't get the same quality of products that come out of the sometimes brutal system of capitalism that end up at the other side.
And many called for Tarasov to be imprisoned. His accounts were frozen and the KGB launched an investigation into him, but ultimately they found nothing, and so he was allowed to go back to his business, and soon after he became a millionaire in the traditional sense. Now, not a lot is known about Tarasov and his business, but what is certain is that his relations with the Soviet government were pretty awful, and it wasn't long until he fled the country and eventually settled in the UK. Despite all of this hubbub though, more and more Soviet citizens became wealthier and wealthier over the next 2 years. And when the USSR collapsed and many public assets were sold off, it was these people mostly who brought shares in them and whose wealth then subsequently exploded, giving some of the post-Soviet states the oligarchs that they're known for. I hope you enjoyed this episode and thank you for watching.
Thank you for making awesome patrons. Video. Gonna come out with another one very soon. Hope you guys learned something. I did. I'll see you guys next time.